20 years, both in England and in Australia, and it was very much the recognition of the role employment can play, not just as the goal of rehabilitation, but very much part of the process of rehabilitation that attracted me to setting up Social Firms Australia. So I've been the Executive Director of Social Firms Australia, otherwise known as SOFA, for the last 5.5 years now.
Thank you. So we promised five. I mentioned there's hundreds of lessons in Caroline's journey, but we promised five. So I'm going to step through sort of five of the key lessons that Caroline had mentioned. The first one in this process of mental health and employment, the lesson of the value of paid employment.
Yes,
what can you say about that?
It was whilst working at the clubhouse. So when I worked at the Schizophrenia Fellowship, we were looking for alternative models of rehabilitation. I took advantage of the fact that we were moving from one location to another to take some time, some leave without pay, and visited Fountain House, a clubhouse in New York, on my way back to the UK for a visit, and was amazed at the energy and the involvement and the sense of ownership that the members of Fountain House had. And getting to know the model over the following months, could see the benefit of the activity within the day programme leading to paid employment. And it was very much that visit that inspired myself and Kim Kerr to promote the clubhouse model in Australia, and we established Bromham Place back in the early 90s, I think. And it was very clear there that a lot of the goals we'd been attempting to help people achieve through rehabilitation programs were much easier once somebody was in one of the supportive work programs at the clubhouse. It also meant that staff were far more focused, that if you were taking a group into a workplace, you needed to make sure that they, did know that they had to take a shower in the morning, clean clothes, that they couldn't be having a smoke every 10 minutes, that language did have to be appropriate. And so it imposed a much stronger lever on staff as well as the members of the programme. And what we saw was some of the people who hadn't really engaged with the rehabilitation side of things suddenly becoming much more energised, demonstrating much more capacity than we had realised. And so I think it was from that point on that I really recognised the value of paid employment and the sense of status, purpose, structure that resulted. We all know, the inevitable question, what do you do? It is great to have an answer. But over and above all of that, the fact that you're paying somebody for their time is a very clear expression of the community valuing the person. This is how much we value you. We value you to pay you X amount per hour to deliver Y goods or services. So it's a very fundamental message to someone that they can make a contribution, that other people believe that they can make that contribution. If other people believe they can make that contribution, they're more likely to believe it themselves. And we saw a lot of people turn around in their sense of self and place in the world and what they were capable of doing.
Okay, which kind of point two that we had down was the role employment can play in rehabilitation, and you sort of talked about that as well. So, how do you, just as a question, how do you think PDRSs and clinical services look at employment for their clients?
I know when I was working in a psychosocial rehab service prior to the clubhouse, and particularly if you've worked in England, I'd worked in mental health services or an assessment centre. I was removed from the world of work, and so didn't really realise, had no idea what was involved in working in an office. So I think it is difficult to get a sense of what's required in a number of different positions. It's difficult to know how best to respond when some of the participants or clients you're working with talk about getting back to work. Some may have had a significant work history prior to becoming unwell and may hope to get back to that kind of work routine. And I think a part of you feels that if you encourage them to go back to full-time work, you might be helping to set them up, setting somebody up to fail, but you're not sure what would be suitable for them, and you don't want to be insulting by saying, well, I think you should just look at entry-level work. So there are a lot of complex reactions that get in the way of a clear path forward for that person to return to work or commence work for the first time. And what is important is that there is a coordinated message. Again, from experience, there were many people I and others worked with who would get one message from their clinical team about the risk of becoming too stressed by returning to work, and that wouldn't be good for the illness. Carers may have a different perspective, or the same, that PDRS services and the disability employment services, of course, will have a different view. And in an environment where there is a lot of confusion, ambiguity, it's quite a complex environment, to increase the confusion for the individual by having mixed messages about whether they're able to work or not isn't helpful. And I think most people would agree now that the single most important criterion is that the person wants to work, and then it is up to the rest of us and that person to help make that happen. So whether that's just a few hours a week in a supportive environment, or somebody getting training and then going on to work in a supportive work environment or into independent employment, I think that is the flame that you have to start with.
So clearly you're passionate about the employment role in mental health. How did you end up focusing on that? You've got a long history in working in mental health. How did you end up focusing on employment?
I think it was working in the clubhouse model where we could see the difference a return to work made for people. There's a line I often use: the last one to discover water will be the fish. We get so busy in our work routines and racing around, answering the mobile, writing reports, muttering about deadlines, that it's such a luxury, for people who aren't required to meet deadlines. And in fact, probably nobody is that bothered whether they're up or in the day or at night. It's so important to have that sense of being needed, and that's where rehabilitation starts for a lot of people. That sense of being needed, it's a very powerful human need, and not reinforced by messages that, well, you've got the pension, you've got supported accommodation, you've got somewhere to go in the day, you've got services that are being delivered. It's all about receiving a service, whereas being able to work and being paid for that work is very much about recognising that that person can make a valuable contribution, is making a difference to the world around them. And I think that goes into the heart of recovery, as well as social inclusion and all the benefits of having paid employment. And there was one particular instance when we had a group work programme from the clubhouse in Richmond, where somebody who hadn't worked for many years joined the crew. He'd been in hospital for many decades, and so was in his 50s when he joined this particular group, going to pack health food products at a health food business. And it was on the way back, he asked to get off at a tram stop to go to Brighton. We had a half-hour drive to get back to Richmond, and he had about an hour's train ride from there to get back to his home in Heidelberg. And when I suggested he might want to leave visiting his friend till another day, because he'd just done his first day's work in many years, his response was, but I promised my friend I'd call in on my way home from work. And it meant so much to him to be able to tell his friend I'd call in on my way home from work, that was quite a turning point for me, and that we need to be very energetic about helping people find employment that's accessible and durable. A lot of people get help to start a job, but for many people it's maintaining employment that's the challenge. And the number of people who were uncomfortable disclosing that they have a mental illness in an interview is understandable, and to try and create supportive work environments where people can discuss their support needs and know that it's fine to talk about your diagnosis or the medication, or you need to see the doctor, or need to have some information repeated, seems like a very sort of logical workplace to be energetic about developing.
So, safe to say then that lesson 1 and 2 are very, very linked. The value of paid employment, and like as you're saying there, for that guy just to be able to say, I'm coming home from work, to identify as someone who's working.
Yes. To rebadge yourself is important so that you can define who you are differently. I also think work is very important for displacing the illness. That again, having worked with a lot of people who are unemployed, the illness became the most interesting thing about them. People would ask, how are you feeling? The visits in the week would generally be the doctor, the case manager, support workers. Mental illness became the wallpaper of their world. This was all that was going on. And I think having a job to do, even a part-time job with 2 or 3 shifts a week, displaces some of the vacuum that the illness will occupy. And so it imposes new habits, new routines, new activities, new conversations, the travelling time to get to work and to get home. It's a bit like having a strap. It imposes order and structure and purpose on your thinking and on your living, and you have to organise the rest of your life around it. So I think just that displacement therapy is probably underestimated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to get up at a certain time. You're seeing the same people on the bus into work. It does help pick up some of the other routines that, again, in rehab we would struggle to help people achieve.
Yeah, and surely battle some of those barriers of social exclusion.
Yes, and we all know that it's through meeting someone with an illness such as schizophrenia or depression or bipolar that reduces stigma more than anything else. That it's a very powerful message to the community that the person with a mental illness is the person with a lot of other things going on in their life, and they happen to have a mental illness as well. And ideally, being in a work environment where you can disclose is important for the individual. But I think in terms of social inclusion, generally, it does mean that you are part of the community and you are contributing to the community. And it is the power of being able to make a contribution that is much more affirming and rehabilitative than watching daytime TV all day.
Can't be good for you.
Send us all up the hole.
That's right. So there's 2 very positive lessons learnt there about the effect and the good things that can happen from employment for someone with a mental illness. Maybe the third one, potentially, I guess you can't avoid that the third lesson might be a little more negative, technically, or a little more pragmatic, in that the third one I have here is the barriers faced by people with a mental illness or consumers in their return to work. And I think you've learnt some lessons there.
Yes, that we soon saw the value of employment. Also was aware that the majority of people we're working with wanted to return or start work, but how difficult it is for that population to get and keep a job. That starting a new job is one of life's greatest stressors, and mental illness is stress related, so it's highly likely that somebody will experience some symptoms sometime after starting a new job, or their stress levels will be increased. And for those people who have chosen not to disclose for very understandable reasons, they're then starting a stressful experience without being able to draw on the support that they are entitled to. And so not only are they not getting the support they need because of having a mental illness, a lot of people talked about feeling uncomfortable because they hadn't disclosed. And then there's the stress of starting a new job and feeling awkward about asking yet again, how do I use the photocopier? And the support system that you may have in place is only going to be able to take effect after hours or in the lunch break. And so we saw a lot of people get supported to start a job but struggle to keep the job. And so it did seem very important to look at options where a disclosure-friendly work environment can be created. And there are many other areas that make it difficult for people to sustain work, and I think working with the individual and their support team to ensure that gaps that may be required are filled, so that if somebody does need time off because of their mental health, that there is a strategy in place established so that the work can continue until they're able to return to their position.
Okay. So there's some of those barriers are the barriers that we'll all face in returning to work or starting a new job.
Yes, yes, that we would.
Getting used to new environment, all of those things.
Yes, but how we cope with that stress will vary,
Mm.
and what the results of that stress will be. So you or I
Yeah.
might get stressed. You might feel you need another cigarette,
Yes.
or
I might want to step on a computer.
talk too much or talk too little.
Yes.
And we all have to manage our stress. But for people who experience stress-related illnesses, that will mean that there might be more likelihood that they'll feel anxious and paranoid, or that the voices will recur, or they won't sleep, which then increases the likelihood that some of the symptoms might develop. And then there's the risk of not being able to concentrate and disorganized thinking, and then the anxiety of feeling you're not doing a good job. And we all will feel, as you say, anxiety, paranoia. It's just to what level we experience it at, and how we can manage it. And I think people with mental illness, same as everybody else, can learn coping strategies, and so become better able to identify those environments that are going to be stressful, and identify the warning signs for themselves, and then develop strategies to reduce the first. And if they can't reduce the first, as in the case of a new job, manage some of their early warning signs, or take suitable preventative actions to reduce the effect of those side effects.
Okay, interesting. So leading on from that, some of those barriers. One of the key lessons I've got here is just simply social firms. Obviously, there was a progression for you from the clubhouse models into social firms. What can you tell me about that as a lesson learned?
A lesson learned.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was in 2001. I was fortunate to get a Churchill Fellowship to look at other models that will help people with mental illness get and keep a job. And it was the social firm model that made the most sense. I was very impressed with quite a few in the UK. As with all models, there were some that, weren't quite as impressive, but three that stood out were a guest house in Edinburgh, a large wholesale health food business in Cambridge, and a packing business in Cardiff. And each of them were clearly commercially functional businesses that didn't even promote the fact that they were a social firm. The most important priority was ensuring that a quality service was being provided. However, the purpose of each of those businesses was not to provide accommodation to people on holiday in Scotland, or to sell health foods to residents of Cambridge. The purpose was actually to create employment for people with a mental illness, and they created that employment through setting up a business. And clearly the business has got to function efficiently to have repeat customers coming back. And all three of them had operated for many years, and at the same time were able to offer a range of supports and opportunities for people with a mental illness. So the two sort of key features of a social firm is that it's a commercial business. The majority of income needs to be generated through the trade of the business. It's understood that if you have a certain number of staff with a mental illness or disability, productivity may well be an issue. Even just having a lot of part-time staff is going to affect productivity. And so grants or subsidies can offset some of that loss of productivity. And it's a mix of employees with and without the disadvantage. So between 25 and 50% is the ratio we use here. And again, that's beneficial from a social inclusion perspective. If you've got at least 50% of the staff without the barrier to work, you can not only feel reasonably confident that if you do need to draw on people to do overtime, or to reasonably expect people to turn up at 8 in the morning, or to cope with increased stress within the business, that there's a large number of staff who will be able to respond without feeling they're being pressured. But it also means that there's far more integration between the population who've been excluded from work and the broader work community. So they were both the reasons why it was an attractive model, and we decided to establish Social Firms Australia and set up, ideally, hundreds of social firms over here.
That would be nice.
It would be, yes, but
Yeah.
it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's almost a lesson in itself. It takes time.
Yes.
But it kind of leads into the lesson number 5, I think. And I'm going to try and say this out as some kind of silly accent, but it's got to be real, or keep it real.
Keeping it real.
Keeping it real.
Yes.
For
Yes.
mental health and employment. What does that mean?
And I think, many of the lessons learned since setting up Social Firms Australia at the end of 2004 have been about the business imperatives. And again, a risk in the area of social enterprise more broadly, but particularly social firms where, the trade has got to pay for staff salaries. I and many others that I had contact with in the early years were looking at business types based on what the clients or job seekers with a mental illness might like, or what we thought would work, and familiar ideas such as a community cafe or a kennels or an art gallery with a bookshop were all ideas that might have had the right kind of jobs for people I knew who were looking for work. But what I quickly learnt was that they weren't going to make sufficient money to pay more than one staff, and we were looking at developing social firms to employ at least 5 full-time equivalent staff. And so we learned early on that a lot of business ideas simply weren't going to work as social firms. We also learned early on that even though the social firm is developed and designed to be a supportive work environment for all employees, it was important to communicate that the employees still are expected to be able to meet the minimum requirements of the job, and the purpose of a social firm is not to offer employment to people who aren't going to get a job anywhere else. It's a work environment that can be far more flexible and responsive and take a few more chances, but everybody is going to need to pull together, and that's an important message too, and that people will get a lot of support to do their job. There can be a lot of flexibility around shifts and mentoring, but at the end of the day there is a position description and there is an expectation that people will be able to do as much as is expected in their position description, and with support, with flexibility, with extra coaching. It does come down to the individual being able to make the progress that's required.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, in both counts, it needs to be a real business, and it has to be real work. And for some people, they have found out that they weren't ready to sort of meet the expectations. But the good thing about a social firm is what we've seen is the door was never closed. It was, okay, well, maybe you need to work on A, B, and C. If going without a smoke for 20 minutes is too much right now, maybe talk to some of your support workers about doing a quick course and come back in 6 months and let's have another go, or come back as a casual employee, or come back for some training. So we have seen people return after working on some of the issues that prevented them from getting on with the job the first time round.
And that's a significant difference from working in mainstream employment without disclosing, potentially, would you say? Like, something happens in a non-supportive workplace, you potentially burn all your bridges there.
Yes,
they're not going to invite you back.
We hear about this happening quite a lot, that somebody will be supported to get a job, and particularly if it's a full-time job, you've not only got to manage the job, but you've suddenly got to manage your life around the hours that you're working, and those two combined can be quite catastrophic for someone. And if the person is finding it difficult to manage at work, confidence is a huge issue, so you tend not to ask somebody for support or advice if you're struggling, and it can spiral down quite quickly. And we do hear of a lot of people who just bomb out and don't turn up one day, or are performance managed, and the employer or the co-workers aren't aware that there is a mental illness, or maybe they are, but it's all too late to do anything about it. And so it can can end in sort of quite traumatic circumstances for the employee that's going to often hamper their chances of a safe return to work, a more secure and durable outcome, and also have them feel that they're not capable of working, which is a very sad message for anybody to give themselves. So to build in success, to make sure it works, even if that means starting with 4 hours a week, and start with a role that's very manageable, because often the issues people will be working with are arriving on time, confidence, focusing on the requirements of that particular job, going without the smoke, resisting the temptation to quit when they're feeling a bit anxious, getting over some of the early stresses involved with starting a new job, and then building up their skills and responsibilities as time goes on.
Yeah. So is it safe to say that, and I think we've seen this in some of the other programs we've run, that there's all sorts of stages of job readiness, and it's that entry into a social firm isn't necessarily you need to be at a certain stage of readiness for that. That it's if you're not ready for other employment, then potentially you're not ready for employment in a social firm, even with the extra support.
Well, you might.
How would you sort of see the difference?
Yes, I would think there would be some people who could work in a social firm who wouldn't be able to work in an environment where there's no support or less support. I mean, ideally, other workplaces should build in that support, and that's something we'd like to see social firms role modelling for other workplaces, because a lot of the support is available to employers, but of course it's going to be difficult if the person hasn't disclosed. But the social firm will inevitably be making more accommodations than, not all workplaces, but most workplaces. And you see, a social firm could have a come and try afternoon. Certainly, some of the ones we work with do have work experience programs or opportunities to just come and watch what's going in or join in for a while. So making it a very easy return to work, starting with an afternoon or turning up for an hour, trying it out, and then moving into increased hours if it looks like there's an opportunity.
Okay. What advice would you give to, let's start with, there's a few different people that can be affected by this, but let's say a disability employment consultant who's interested, has clients they're trying to place into employment and wants to know more about social firms, where to find them, how their clients might get work there.
Yes, generally it's a disability employment service who would be setting up the social firm.
Right.
So we work with a number of disability employment services who can see the logic in having their own social enterprise that they're prepared to sort of take on the management of, to create employment and training opportunities for their job seekers. So we're not at the stage quite yet, although there have been some vacancies advertised in other areas in social firms that are doing maintenance, and I think that will probably increase as time goes on. So rather than people looking for a social firm to work in, at the moment it's more the Disability Employment Service or the Australian Disability Enterprise looking to establish a social firm as a division of their organisation.
Okay.
But then it would sort of take its place down the high street. It wouldn't be badged as the Disability Employment Service. It would be the bakery or the nursery or the hotel or whatever the social firms is.
How important do you think that is? And I've sort of seen that sometimes a social firm will say, or a social enterprise even will say what it is and how it works, and often they won't. It's a business and they compete on the level like any other business.
Perhaps it's prudent too, in case people aren't so familiar with the territory, to just define what a social enterprise is, although there's quite a bit of discussion. We stick to a fairly basic definition. A social enterprise is a not-for-profit business venture which trades for a social purpose. So it's about the purpose. And now there's quite a bit of discussion about whether a social enterprise has to be a not-for-profit, but we haven't got too engaged in that discussion, I think. And we always say not-for-profit distribution. We want the social firms anyway to be profitable. It's just any surplus goes back into the social firm to create new employment opportunities or to enhance the operation in some way. In the happy event that the social firm can't grow anymore and can't have any more improvements, then it would be the not-for-profit organisation that would be using the surplus to benefit their clients in some other programme. So I always say it's the innermost Russian doll that's the most important. What's the purpose of the social firm or the social enterprise? And I think there may be some risk if there's a for-profit entity setting up a social enterprise, because it just needs to be very clear what the purpose of setting up the business has been. What was the question?
Just that difference where some social. Well, it was good to distinguish social firm and social enterprise, but just where businesses may identify and promote the fact.
Oh, that's right.
And where they may not, where that kind of decision lies.
And I think it's very much the choice of the organisation setting up the social firm. And because it's important that the commercial business goals are the priority, because if the support or social goals become the priority, the business operations may be compromised by a focus on support or the individual needs of employees. So it is important that if it's a bakery, the bread has got to be fresh and it's got to be ready at 6 in the morning and delivered. And it's important that the message to the customers is this is a bakery. That's the number one message. Number two message may well be, and it's a social firm creating employment for people who've experienced barriers in the past. Some choose not to promote it at all, and others would have it in their marketing material. I think all would agree it doesn't make sense to rely on that as your marketing pitch. It might help you sell a few coffees or whatever, but if the coffee isn't up to the required standard, people won't come back. But I think it is good to promote a social firm as a social firm. I think it's an exciting new development in the world of business. I think for-profits and not-for-profits should be able to take their place next to each other down the high street and collaborate and understand that you need both. And that we should all be looking to be accessible to people with mental illness and other barriers, and that there may be lessons to be learnt for the for-profit businesses that the social firms can really offer valuable insights and expertise into. And I think customers too, if they know that if they buy their bonsais or their bread from this particular social firm, not only are they getting a great quality loaf of bread, but they're also helping somebody with a mental illness.
Double impact.
Yes.
Okay. I think there's so many more lessons, but I hope that's something we can continue on the forums. There's a forum there for social enterprises and social firms. And I dare say if you were to post questions there, we'd be able to get some good answers on those. So I encourage, you're probably watching this after the fact, given we didn't quite manage to broadcast, but please have a look at the site and the forums, and we'll hopefully continue the conversation there and through our forums offline and through our forums online.
Great.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that's it. No, only that it's much easier talking than it is typing. So
yes, that is true. That is true. We'll see what we can do about that.
Method of communicating on the e-village in the future.
Yes, it is easier. If we could do it without technical difficulties, it'd be wonderful.
Yes, but that's all part of
a
new village.
Absolutely. All right, so thank you for, I can't say joining us, but thank you for listening. Right, thank you.